Jesus freak here, and I know I've pulled off a couple New Testaments that I've released. One was a revision of an earlier translation, one was a whole new translation. And I've tended to feel like both of them fell short of what I really want to do with a new translation. And I've been thinking about whether this might be possible to pull off. You see, I don't speak Greek. Now, obviously that's going to be a problem, but it's mitigated by the fact that several very literal translations into Latin exist, and even though I don't actually speak Latin, I'm proficient enough in several of its descendant languages that's not really that much of a problem. I can sort of reconstruct it, and there's also literal translations from Latin to English that I can reference and sometimes use those to assist me. Or, Wiktionary has a Latin section. So I've got a lot of resources when I can work with Latin. And the Vulgate, actually, so far as it can be reduced to only the 66 books as we have it in our canon, throw out the middle of Daniel 3, throw out the rest of Daniel after chapter 12, the rest of Esther after 10:3, replace the Psalms with the Juxta Hebraica, which was also Jerome's work and was the Psalter intended for it. Just how some bishops' Bibles replace the Psalter with the one from the Great Bible. The Vulgate had the same thing happen with it. Anyway, the idea would be to try to find some people who might be more proficient in Greek and take a different approach. I'd like to compare Robinson Pierpont's text with Antonides' text in 1904, 1912. I can't find a good source for this text. I think there's a Romanized source on GitHub that's kind of tangentially connected with Maurice Robinson, and there's a copy on some website, goarch.org, I think, that's no verse numbers and one chapter per page, so it's hard to work with. But I want to compare these and the received text and maybe make reference to Nestle-Aland. I don't like the methodology of Nestle-Aland, so most of the time I'd probably be throwing it in wood chipper. Might make some reference to the Vulgate because I think there's sometimes that it might preserve a better reading. It certainly helped me decode the scribal abbreviations in Erasmus' first 3 editions. I have his first 3 editions. The first 2 are diglots. The third, I have a Latin-only version. And I want to go through and do a new translation of the New Testament, more or less, less more, more or less, in the vein of the ASV. That is to say, a sort of modern English, but still using certain archaisms. Actually, perhaps the confraternity Catholic New Testament might be a better point of reference, but obviously I don't want this to be a Catholic. I'm not a Catholic. My target audience is obviously not Catholic. And I've said what I think about the Catholic Church's Catholicness. So, I tend to take different approaches between the Testaments. But what I'm looking to do is come up with a generally literal translation which is as worship-friendly as the King James, which I think, a lot of versions, they're just not. There's this meme going around, and it's gone around for probably 50 years now. And it's like, they used the street language of the day to write the New Testament. No, they didn't. They used the common language of the day. There's a difference. The common language of 2019 is English as, proper English. Not, gutter English. Not like Ebonics and stuff like that. It's proper English. And I know that sounds kind of Anglo-centric. English is the de facto lingua franca of the world. I know a number of people, some of them even speak the same native language, and when they speak to each other, they use English. I got a friend from Brazil, a friend from Portugal. Both of them speak Portuguese natively. They speak to each other in English. I got two friends from Belgium. I don't think I've ever known them to use Dutch with each other, or even though they both speak it natively. They almost always use, English. That's beyond the fact that I have, my circle that handles anime translations. We got me in the US. We got someone else in the UK. We're both native English speakers. Then we have someone else in Belgium whose native language is Dutch. Then we have someone else from Belgium whose native language is Dutch. We have someone from Portugal, his native language is Portuguese. We have someone from Norway, his native language is Norwegian. And, most of us are not native speakers, but we work in English. And we have no problem doing it. And, this is our common tongue. It's normal, standard English. I mean, yeah, there's differences between the kind I use, which is straightforward American, and some of us use this. And then on the other hand, some of us are using UK English. But that's minor. The common tongue is a standard level of English. It's proper English. It's not excessively casual. It's not excessively formal. Although, honestly, I'd probably translate the New Testament more formally because that's what it's going for. Luke, when he wrote the Gospel of Luke, he wrote it as close as he could get to the style of the Greek Old Testament. So, this idea that the New Testament is written in street language, it falls flat when you look at the actual evidence. And I don't want to translate in street language. We got the CSB, we got the NIV. We got more than enough versions that are written in street language. We don't need another one. And in fact, I tend to like what I call Victorian, sort of generically Fendeseca English, um, Victorian and Wardian period English. And sometimes they literally use the these and thous and stuff, Elizabethan Jacobean archaisms, for stylistic reasons. Like, Margaret Hunt's translation of the Brothers Grimm. It sometimes used archaic language. I'm fine with the occasional archaism, so long as it doesn't affect readability. And I think as long as you know how thee and thou are supposed to work, and I believe a lot of people don't know how thee and thou is supposed to work, that's why the Trinitarian Westminster Bible has to have a whole section dedicated to explaining thee and thou. But if I were going to do another translation according to what I think would be the best use for the purpose I want to use it for, it'd thee and thou. And I'm sure that sometimes I sound sort of pseudo or neo-Victorian, which my appearance probably gives the lie to. But I do have some neo-Victorian tendencies. It's just how I grew up. Anyway, like I said, I'm kind of interested in seeing how the patriarchal text of Constantinople from 1904 and 1912 stacks against the majority text of Robinson Pierpont versus the Textus Receptus. I haven't been able to get through the limited resources I have, and I do know that sometimes it agrees with the Textus Receptus against the majority text. I believe it does have the comma Johanneum in brackets. And there might be other places where I think it has readings that are standard in the received text that aren't in the majority. I'm fine with that. Some places I think that even the majority text might have had something drop out. In most cases, I'm actually preferring a longer text, so long as it can be supported in Greek. I mean, there's places, they're obviously invented in Latin. The Vulgate had its own separate transmission line from the Greek and accrued some issues of its own. I've mentioned the whole ligno-libero thing. Was basically a typographical error in Latin and had no justification in Greek. This kind of stuff happens. But what I'd establish as my, preferred text would be different than, what you're likely to find in other translations. And that's what I want to do. Maybe I'd have some notes for certain readings that might be just as favorable, or which would make my text read differently from the King James. If that's how it comes out. And I'd probably take a more eclectic approach with the Old Testament, but it's neither here nor there. Get a New Testament out first. Just some thoughts. Jesus freak out.